if you're in that state and you try to eat, you're not going to get digestion because all the blood is not in the organs. They're not feeding the organs. So eating a lot of broccoli, asparagus, and lean protein, what did I give myself? A bunch of sulfur, and then a bunch of indigestible fibers that fed my current ratios. And so basically I gave myself a gut issue eating a lot of chicken and asparagus and broccoli. And so you create this dysregulated system where you're essentially calling in firefighters all the time, but you don't have any resources for those firefighters to actually turn the water on and actually get rid of the fire. I watched this movie and the person in it was like a famous con man, went to prison and they put him in solitary because they were so embarrassed by what he did. And he said, in solitary, they feed us one small plate of food and I'm obese from the malnourishment. I'm not a political person, but one of the things in every single movie is that when a government comes in, they remove one form of leadership, they then have to institute infrastructure back in, or another person rises, and that may not be desirable. Your body is no different. The thing that we want to think about here is histamine. Okay, so what is histamine? If you scratch yourself and your skin turns red, there's a histamine reaction. It's basically a chemical messenger that just sends heat to an area. If you have some of the small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, one of the things that you're going to have is a lot more heat in the area. And you might even have more pain. There is something called TRPV1, and this is a receptor that basically helps you locate pain. It can actually be oversensitized in the gut, and you can get reactions to this. And what histamine does is it brings blood, it brings heat into an area, it brings nutrients, and when that occurs, your body needs to be able to turn off the swelling. So how does it turn off the swelling? It uses something called diamine oxidase. Diamine oxidase helps you turn the swelling off. Now, if you don't have enough nutrients to create diamine oxidase, you basically have all this itchiness, all this redness, all this bloating, all this inflammation, all this pain, and it may not be able to turn itself off. And so you create this dysregulated system where you're essentially calling in firefighters all the time, but you don't have any resources for those firefighters to actually turn the water on and actually get rid of the fire. Now, the other interesting thing about this is that histamine and estrogen are very related. So now we're talking about hormone balance. And so if you have high histamine, you're going to have high estrogen. And if you have high estrogen, you're going to have high histamine. And so then you end up having, secondarily, it might be a gut issue that then drives a hormone problem. Okay. Third thing we didn't talk too much about, but is worth noting, is we also want to think if we're swelling up and we have all this gas inside the GI lining, inside the small intestine, we're also just stretching. So picture a balloon. When you stretch it, you blow it up, you are taking surface area and you're making it thinner and thinner. And then as it's thinner and thinner, you're actually stretching all that connective tissue. When that connective tissue is on more stretch, you can actually start having issues with the permeability of that because it's not slacked, right? You have more tightness and there is things that can move back and forth, right? So we start creating more gradient issues, and that can create an aggravation inside the gut as well. So now we've covered some of the things that can happen. Let's talk about how this might occur without, let's say, the dietary portion of it. So the first one I'm going to talk about, which I see all the time, is low stomach acid. So how do we get low stomach acid? First, stomach acid is an important thing that we need whenever we eat something to actually break the enzymes down, clean the food, start digesting the food. Remember what I said earlier is that one of the issues with small intestinal bacterial overgrowth that feeds this loop is that you're not breaking the fats down. So they sit here and they just rot. And when they're in the small intestine, they should be absorbing. So think about it like here in the stomach, it breaks down. It needs to be broken down further. It gets to the small intestine. I should have nutrient absorption. It then moves into the large intestine, and now I'm getting proper transit time to move that out. But if I take something that's not broken down and I give it to your small intestine, now it's going to sit there because it is too large to break down. It slows down transit time. One of the reasons that can happen is somebody has low stomach acid. Now, low stomach acid, we're going to think about that productively as actually a symptom. Two things about stomach acid. One, it's expensive to produce anything that is strong in the body. And so I want you to think your hormones are strong, they're expensive to make. Your stomach acid is strong, it's expensive to make, so it takes nutrients. So you have to be eating a diet that actually allows you to have the nutrients, and these are called cofactors, which are the factors associated with being able to build that thing. You need to eat a diet that's rich enough to have the cofactors to actually generate stomach acid. And most people have no idea what that is. Secondly, you need to be able to be in a relaxed state. So it takes a lot of energy to create stomach acid. So if you're eating and you're stressed and you're like, I got a 30-minute work break, or my kids are yelling at me, or I got to be on a work call, or I'm eating on a work call, it might be really hard to create stomach acid because you're not in a relaxed state. And some SIBO, potentially, can be caused by not actually breaking your food down in the first place. And so you have these large undigested food particles sitting in the small intestine when they should be there for absorption, and they just ferment, and then you get all the hydrogen gas, all the methane gas, all the sulfur-based gas that we had discussed. Another thing is if you're eating right after you work out, you are exercising and you are putting yourself into what's called a sympathetic state, which means that all the blood is in your muscles. It is not in your organs. And so when you are in a sympathetic state, your body is ready to run away from something. It's fight or flight. That's why people consume pre-workouts, energy drinks, coffee. If you're in that state and you try to eat, you're not going to get digestion because all the blood is not in the organs. They're not feeding the organs. They're not driving digestive process. They're here. Right? So low stomach acid is going to be an issue. Not breaking down food is going to be an issue. All right, so let's talk about solutions, probably the part that you've been waiting for. So obviously, first thing we talked about is understand what the test is saying. Do you have more hydrogen? Do you have more methane? Do you have more sulfur? Do you have low stomach acid? Do you have H. pylori? Do you have biofilm? We got all these things. Have you imbalanced the estrogen? Do you have a histamine loop? Have you damaged the lining? Have you damaged the parotid cells through alcohol? Well, we got a lot of stuff going on. Okay, here's the first place to start is understand that your daily habits will carry you the furthest. And so if you're running around in a high stress mode, if you're eating coffee on an empty stomach, driving an acidic environment, if you're trying to shove your food down in the middle of your lunch while you're on a Zoom call and you're totally sympathetic, you're gonna have a hard time getting better even no matter what supplements you take. So the first place I focus with clients on is lifestyle. You gotta nail the lifestyle, and you basically gotta find some way to get your body in a parasympathetic state. Cool. So let's say we got that covered. So now we go, all right, now we have a chance. We have a chance that something good can happen. So then we go, all right, what do I need to do now in terms of food? One, I have to understand the different fibers that can feed these different bacteria. We talked about carbohydrates being potentially an issue for someone who has more hydrogen-based SIBO, which means that if they eat this sugar or carbs, they're gonna start feeding that, and then they can feed too much of the archaea and start driving more methane-based SIBO. They eat foods high in histamine, and they have this whole histamine estrogen inflammation loop going on. They're gonna need to do things around that. So they're gonna have to remove and add foods in. Now, there's also different kinds of things that we just, maybe a little bit out of the scope of this video, but are helpful with SIBO as well, like polyols. If you're chewing gum, if you're eating with bad meal frequency timing, so for example, you have something called the migrating motor complex, which is when the valves open up to move food through your different digestive system. So that means, hey, you're gonna open a valve here so food can go from the stomach to the small intestine, and then the small intestine to the large intestine. So when those are valves, and they're on timing frequency. When you're eating all the time, when you're snacking, you're at your desk eating something, you're actually opening that valve all the time. And as you do that, bacteria travels from one organ to another. It's not supposed to do that. So if you're chewing gum, if you're snacking, doing any of these things, we call these food hygiene, you're totally just shooting yourself in the foot. So don't be doing that, okay? So polyols like gum are definitely a no. Indigestible fibers, this is a huge one. So you have to think that bacteria help you assimilate things. They help you convert processes. They help you convert processes more than pretty much anything else in your body. And so what that means is that some people that can't break down milk or have weird reactions to proteins, like even in alcohol, okay, they don't have the microbiome required to convert these things. And so the most common one is lactobacillus. And so people hear about this all the time, but it's an oxygen-rich bacteria, and if you don't have it, you really just can't break down milk, right? You can't break down the lactose into what's called lactase. You can't break down lactase and get the lactose to lactase, it becomes toxic, it rots, and then you have issues with dairy. That's very common. But that happens in your body everywhere, not just with lactose, okay? And when we talk about lifestyle, which is not something I'm getting too specific into because I don't know if you're exercising or not exercising, but if you're doing a lot of lactic-based training and you have SIBO, you are probably building up too much lactate. You can't clear it, and you could have a lot of DOMS, a lot of soreness, but it could blow your gut up. okay? And so you have to modify the training program if you know someone has a lactate clearance issue. Otherwise, you're feeding their SIBO and their gut issues with the exercise they're doing. You're feeding chemistry in one area, it's making them worse, okay? These are all different things that you'll have to adjust in order to have probably the most optimal successful program. And so the food fibers, the indigestible fibers, so if you're eating protein bars with chicory root, anything that doesn't digest, that's going to be feeding bacteria. And if you have SIBO, you have imbalanced bacteria, which means you're pretty much throwing a stimulus package into the body and saying, here's $1 million and I've got a hood full of gangsters and I wonder what they're going to buy. Nothing good, okay? And that's how feeding prebiotics are to the body, okay? So when you think about prebiotic fibers, what are prebiotic fibers? You've got bacteria in your stomach. If you wanted to take those as a supplement, we call those probiotics, okay? So you already have probiotics in your stomach. They're happening whether you ate them or not. That's the current ratio you have. If you eat anything that doesn't digest, it becomes a food source for those bacteria fibers. And so those are prebiotic fibers. So if you take something like inulin, which is like the fibers from onion, those indigestible fibers are now feeding whatever balance of microbiome you have in your stomach. And so you are making those ratios more exaggerated. Okay, I don't want to say they're bad because I don't know if they're bad on you or not, but you're exaggerating whatever ratio that you have. This is actually the issue that I ran into that gave me all these problems. I didn't know this as a trainer, and I ate a lot of broccoli and I ate a lot of asparagus. So eating a lot of broccoli, asparagus, and lean protein, what did I give myself? A bunch of sulfur, and then a bunch of indigestible fibers that fed my current ratios. And so basically I gave myself a gut issue eating a lot of chicken and asparagus and broccoli. Very fun. And among other things, I gave myself secondary infections too because I didn't know any of this. So learn the hard way, you benefit from the video that you're watching, so that's good. I'm happy for you. So then what we have to do is go, all right, I've now changed my food, so I'm not feeding this problem. I've changed my lifestyle, I'm not feeding this issue. Third thing, then we go, okay, cool, I've handled my neurological system, so now I have to do something with the chemistry to actually repair the issue. So just removing the food fibers is not enough, by the way, because as soon as you eat the food fibers, it's going to go back to the way it was. Okay, removing the stress is a huge benefit, but it's not necessarily going to make you bulletproof because you haven't changed the bacterial balance here. You haven't repaired any of the lining. So the first stage you want to do is we want to go, based off all the issues I have, how do I want to tackle them? You probably want to do something for the enzymes. You probably want to do something for all the nutrients you haven't been absorbing. You probably want to do something for the clearance of the toxins in the body. And then based off in the gut where you have the most damage, you probably want to do something for that. For example, some people are going to have more damaged stomach. If you damage the stomach, it doesn't break food down, you're going to eventually get damaged to the small intestine, and then small intestine to large intestine, so on and so on. So you need to take supplements to basically repair each of these sections. After you do the repair phase, you should have a pretty well-moving transit system. That's very good. So now we are ready to actually go and start to clean house with some of these different bacteria. So if we have hydrogen-based bacteria, depending on what it is, there are certain supplements that work well to get rid of those. Methane-based bacteria, certain supplements. If you have biofilm and negative gram bacteria, different supplements. Sulfur-based, different supplements, so on and so on. So you're probably thinking, wow, that sounds like a lot of supplements. It is a lot of supplements. So you can't get rid of all four at once, okay? So if you do have all four mixed, or you have multiple infections, you're not going to go after all of them at once. Why? One of the things is they all feed off different food sources. What am I going to eat? Okay, nothing. You can't eat anything if you go after all four. Second, if you have that much toxins in the system and you start going after them, what is your detox day going to be like? You're going to be on the toilet, I guarantee you. You're going to be on the toilet anyway if you do this, but you're definitely going to be on the toilet if you go after 4 infections at once and you don't eat any food fibers. That also brings us to a good point when we talk about immunity, is that you really need to be eating basically no lower than 25% of your basal metabolic rate to have a successful immune response. Okay, so that means a lot of times when people are like, oh, I'm not going to eat anything, I'll just take these supplements and I'll just eat some protein powder and then hopefully I'll get rid of the infection. Well, that's not going to work because one, you don't have the cofactors that you needed to basically digest all the food and make all this happen, but two, you also don't have enough nutrients to even feed your immune system. And so it's very interesting. I watched this movie and the person in it was like a famous con man, went to prison and they put him in solitary because they were so embarrassed by what he did. And he said, in solitary, they feed us 1 small plate of food and I'm obese from the malnourishment. Interesting. I'm obese from the malnourishment. And I've seen this working with clients. Clients don't eat a lot of food, but they're very obese. Why are they obese? From the malnourishment. Because what happens when you don't have the nutrients you need to digest food? What happens when you don't have the nutrients you need to suppress inflammation? What happens when you don't have the nutrients you need to move toxins out of the body? And if you know about the different stages of liver detox that the body needs, it requires a pretty good amount of amino acids to be able to do that. And so if you don't have the necessary proteins, you cannot detoxify your liver, which means your body's going to have to store those as fat particles. That's going to feed the obesity. You're also going to get the unsuccessful transit time, so things are moving very slow, which is going to feed the gas, which just then feeds the loop that we're in. So at this point now, what we know is we have to do something to start getting rid of the bad bacteria, the biofilm, these kind of things. We need to eat enough during this period to have a successful immune response, and we need to be giving the body enough nutrients to allow the detoxification process to happen. After that, anytime I introduce something that is of stronger antimicrobial to the body, it's not like the body is, you've introduced this in, and so I'm only getting rid of your hydrogen-based bacteria that's giving you SIBO today. No, it's going to bomb everything that is even remotely susceptible to that. And then all that inflammation and detoxification is going to have a cost to the body. So we have to go back and we have to repair that, and we have to basically take care of that organization. That makes sense. I'm not a political person, but one of the things in every single movie is that when a government comes in, they remove one form of leadership, they then have to institute infrastructure back in, or another person rises, and that may not be desirable. Your body is no different. If you go in and you just bomb a bunch of stuff, you blast it out, and then you walk around and you go back to eating things, you're gonna get the government equivalent of what most control-interested nations try not to do, okay? So you have to go and you have to repair that. After that, you can go and you can retest, you can see where you're sitting, you can see if there are different levels of secondary things that show up. There are lots of things that you can do, but that would be what I call a successful three-step process. You have addressed these basic issues, and let's recap in terms of helping you understand something before we end this video. And that is, what is it going to take for me to make sure that I don't recreate this? So the first one's going to be lifestyle. Okay, this is probably the most important one, because like I said, you can take all these supplements, you don't change the lifestyle, you don't change the stress, it's not going to resolve itself. So we have to make sure we're supporting the lifestyle. The second is diet. We have to make sure we're rotating these different kinds of food fibers that we're eating. We have to make sure that we have good food hygiene, those kind of things. And thirdly, different people just naturally have different chemical compounds in their body. They tend to be more biased one way than the other, which means if you have a bias one way, you're probably going to want to avoid eating more of one thing and then probably gravitate to supporting your body in another thing. So now we're thinking about, what do I need to do in terms of, now that I know more about myself, eating things that are going to keep my body in a good spot, in a good situation, allow me to essentially clean house for some of these things that I might be more of a lean towards genetically based off my metabolic weaknesses. And so we want to support that. In summary, today, if you watch this video, what you've learned is probably, hopefully, a lot about small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So what is it? It is usually your small intestine, which is where you absorb nutrients in the body. It has too much imbalance of bacteria. It can then back up the top of the small intestine. Gallbladder tries to release bile to clean, break down fats. Obviously, bile is going to help probably break down proteins too, because it doesn't do anything. Acid and those things are everything. And then what occurs is that you get this discomfort here. It could lead to gallbladder disease. Most people, they have a lot of swelling, okay? And they can have constipation, or they can have diarrhea, or they can have fluctuation between constipation and diarrhea. So just because you don't have one or the other doesn't mean you don't necessarily have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. It just means one day you could have more hydrogen foods in your system, and the next day it converts to methane, and then you have the opposite, okay? And you can also have sulfur-based bacteria. All these different kind of bacteria. How do we get these? Lots of ways we can get them, but remember, in the body and in the universe, like always feeds. So for example, mold is one of those things. It's like where there's no sun and it's wet and there's heat, you get mold, and anytime you have one or two of those factors, you have a chance of driving those. And so bacteria is no different in that way. We have to think about lifestyle. That's going to be really important in terms of long-term, making sure that we have a successful, let's just say, nervous system and food hygiene and stomach acid success. And then we have to know the different kind of fibers that we're eating. And if we have created this kind of infection situation, then what we want to do is we want to think about, okay, how am I rotating these different food fibers so I'm not overfeeding one of these? And maybe you have more hydrogen in your body than the average person, which is totally possible. You just tend to be more hydrogen dominant. Cool. Or you do exercises that drive more acid or different kind of gas and things. Cool. You're just going to have to do different things to balance that out in terms of lifestyle. So, and then when we get to the actual testing, how can I know that I have this? Obviously, you probably want to work with someone who's an expert, and you want to go, I could do a breath, I could do a stool, I could do a blood. Obviously, I have my own biases and what I'm trained in and what I've been taught in. But ultimately, you probably want to think about the most holistic way to get this data that thinks about all the different cofactors I talked about, like digestion and stomach acid and small intestine and stomach, all these things. And then after you do that, what you want to do is you want to make sure that your treatment plan is focusing on the long-term sustainability. It's got the food fibers, and it's got the proteins, it's got enough calories to really make that a successful process. And then you are going to need to repair the things that are coming in from the tests to make sure that you've got good transit and detox pathways, that you can run all the processes we need to have a successful antimicrobial. Then we do the antimicrobials, and then we want to make sure that we're returning a good position of power, whether we're introducing the right kind of probiotics, whether we're introducing prebiotics. Now that there's not a bacterial imbalance, maybe prebiotics are a better idea, making sure that we're taking care of the structure, because as detoxification and swelling happen, we're going to have more structural compensations. We are doing these things, and then we're testing, retesting, and then we're supporting the whole picture of everything the body needs in order to have a healthy bacterial balance. Thank you for watching this video on small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. Hope you learned a lot. YouTube thinks you like this next video, so go ahead and watch it. Hopefully it'll take you to the next piece of information that you need.